Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's a lovely weather out there, and I know it's a challenge being in here rather than being outside and taking nice walks by the river. Today, we're going to be talking about open source, and I usually start this talk by asking a few questions. So the first one and foremost is, how many of you do open source in here? No one. Awesome. So that will be a very useful talk. How many of you wanted to do open source, but you have no idea where to get started, which is usually the challenge, right? I mean, I want to do open source, but I don't know where to start. And my goal for today is to give you enough information about how to go about doing your first open source contribution. And if you eventually decide to take that on and eventually turn to be a maintainer, so you have your own project out there, then there are some useful guidelines about how to be a good maintainer as well. So we'll speak about how to get started, why you should get started with open source, a checklist of the things that you need to know, of the things that you need to do when you decide to do open source, and then we'll talk a little bit about contributing to open source and maintaining open source projects, and another checklist for maintainers. A few points there that will make you even better at what you do. Right, so my name is Christos Matskas, or Chris. I'll spare you with my surname. I used to be an MVP. In fact, I was the shortest-lived MVP in the UK. Only 2 months, and then I joined Microsoft, so they took my title away. But now, I work for Microsoft. So I am a premier field engineer. When I try to describe that, it's a role between a dev and a consultant, and we work with customers in doing lots of things. Surprisingly enough, the more customers that we visit these days, the more open source stuff they do. So it's not just Microsoft things that we do now. It's also open source stuff that we have to know and help them and support. So I'm a speaker. Hello. You can see me here. I blog quite a bit, so I have a site where I blog. Even after I joined Microsoft, I kept my own blog because I think it's nice to have my own brand. I'm a breaker, not a maker. I tend to break a lot of things and a lot of software and a lot of machines out there. I'm a gamer whenever I get time. These days it's about once every 3 months, so my PlayStation sits quietly in the corner. Dad and a husband, so they take a lot of my time as well. So a lot of different things, and I'm not just a developer or a geek, as my wife likes to call me. And this is usually me on my spare time, so I'll give you some time to go through that. If you are developers, you probably have ideas as well about doing things. Everybody got the end? Good. Sure. Loads and loads of different projects. I do lots of different things. I play around with code. I break something and then move on to something else. That's how we learn, and that's the whole point here. And open source allows us to do a lot of these things without feeling guilty about breaking stuff or picking into software that we should not be picking in and breaking license agreements and all these things. So my first experience with open source was totally accidental. Right? I never thought about contributing to open source because I never thought I had the skills to do it. I mean, I was developing for about, maybe 9 years before I did my first contribution. And even though I had really good experience with software, I always felt that I was not competent enough to contribute. So I joined a new company. I was working as a consultant. So they gave me the source code, and I opened it. It was a .NET application. How many of you are .NET developers by any chance? So we have point of reference. You are JavaScript? JavaScript, awesome. So we have NuGet, which is a package manager, same as NPM. And in .NET, you're allowed to actually check in all the packages into your source code, or you can say your Visual Studio, when it builds, to go and pull the stuff out of the web. So I was thinking, this is a massive project. We have lots of NuGet packages. Why do we have them in source control? That doesn't make any sense. So I went and flicked the switch and said, at build time, go and grab the packages. Now, this was my first day at the contract, right? They gave me the source code. I changed stuff, check in, automatic build kicks off, everything is broken. That was like 2 p.m. on my first day. Broke everything, broke the build, congratulations. So I spent about 3 hours trying to figure out how to reverse that, because apparently flicking the switch is just one single tick, but changing that, it takes a lot of effort, because every single CS_proj file, like an npm init file or config file, will have settings there to say when you build, go and grab the packages automatically. So I had to mess with the XML. It's a painful process. And there was nothing documented out there, which was a bit odd. So I documented that at the end. I went home. I said to my wife, I broke everything. It was a fun day, first day in the office. I had to bring donuts the next day for everybody else. And I said, I'll spend some time just trying to blog about it. because there's nothing out there. And that's what I do. I blog about everything I break and make and have fun. And I blogged, I finished about 11 o'clock, and I tweeted about it in hope that one of my 800 bot followers will retweet that. And apparently the NuGet team picked it up and said, this is an awesome article. Why do you not just put it in the docs? So the NuGet documentation that everybody reads when they have issues, I was like, yeah, okay, I'll send you an email. And the guy goes, no, just send us a PR or a pull request, and we'll merge it in. I had no idea what this guy was like. He was like totally alien to me. So I spent the next 3 hours, so we're talking about 11 to maybe 2 a.m., learning about Git, learning about pull request, learning about GitHub and all these crazy stuff. And then I sent the pull request. And eventually about 2 a.m. in the morning, US time was probably normal hours, maybe 6 p.m. at night. My pull request got accepted. I was like, oh my God. So I grabbed my laptop and ran into the bedroom to my wife and say, look, that's my first pull request. Look at that. And she goes, half asleep. She's like, what are you talking about? I was like, look, this is a big deal. You don't understand. She's like, okay, we'll have a chat in the morning. Right. We had a chat in the morning, and she knows now that she lives with a geek, and things like that will happen, but I learned my lesson. No waking up at 2 a.m. in the morning. But my first contribution, thanks to Jeff, who was leading the team at the time, was totally accidental. I never meant to do it. And overnight, I learned how to do pull requests, obviously struggling along and reading instructions, but I did it. It was my first pull request. Now, I could have gone totally wrong. I could have been like, this is total crap, don't do it again. It was awful. And then that would have totally turned me off open source. But this actually opened the floodgates. That was my first massive contribution to the community. I mean, the NuGet documents, they get read by so many developers out there when they have issues. So I was thinking, even 100 people in the world, if they read that, that's 100 people more I reached out there. So I was like, oh, I can do more of that. I can contribute more. It's easy. So your challenge or your experience with open source does not have to be the same. It can be totally different to mine, and everybody has a totally different experience in joining an open source community. But what I'm trying to say here is that it's totally easy. It can be totally accidental, or it can be a purposeful one, as we're going to be discussing today. And this is what I'm going to tell you about. So what is open source? I think most of us out there know what open source is, but just for clarity, definition, it's software whose source code is open and available for modification, enhancement by everyone. Or another way, it's open source software that is made available with a license. That's very important because there are different open source licenses, and we'll discuss about that in a little bit, in which copyright holders do give you the right to study, open, and you can see how things work. And it's an excellent tool as well for you to learn how code works in a brand new environment. So, what is open source? It's a community and a concept. So it's a community because we have thousands, if not millions of developers out there doing open source work and contributing their free time and their free hours to do that work. But it's also a concept because new developers, brand new to the field, straight out of university, even in university or before even university, as they do work with code, they can work with really experienced developers that have been out there for 20, 30 years maintaining projects and learning from them. So as a community, we grow together and we build better software, okay? So who uses open source software? In fact, every single one of us in here uses open source on a daily basis, even if we don't want to admit that. And when I was asked by a junior developer in one of the teams, the question was like, why do you do it? And I said, let's think about that. How many tools that you use today you think they're open source? So you spend like maybe 30 seconds thinking about that, and you realize that more than half of the tools that we were using today were open source. Very good examples. So everyone is using open source. The US Department of Defense, I mean, if they get it wrong, it can go horribly wrong. So they rely on open source to run their stuff. The city of Munich in Germany, Spain, the Federal Aviation Administration, the stock market, for the French Parliament, Cuba, and a lot other organizations as well. Bonus points, if anyone can guess, what's the picture on the right-hand side at the top? It's a Large Hadron Collider, yeah, that runs on open source. And every single submarine out there is also running on open source. This is just a few examples, right? So, everyone was doing it, the cool kids were doing it, so the big companies started doing it as well. This was Apple 2 or 3 years ago coming out with this statement. Apple, the first major computer company to make open source development as a key part of their software strategy. Now, the point over there was the first major contributor, which was like, wait a minute, the community just jumped on that, and it was all over Twitter, and people were laughing or making jokes and everything else. So Apple decided to maybe backtrack that and change the statement over a couple of days. So they were like, open source software is at the heart of the Apple platform. So sounds a little bit better, not the first major contributor. And then we have this one. Anybody knows who said that? Linux is not in the public domain. Linux is a cancer that attaches itself in an intellectual property sense. Hello, Steve Ballmer, Microsoft. That was in 2001. You guys know where we are today, right? I mean, I don't have to spell it out, but there's a massive banner which I forgot to put in. Microsoft loves Linux. We actually announced the SNS Core on the Linux conference, the Red Hat conference, which was just insane. Getting on stage, releasing a product at somebody else's product, and working in the essence of, or the legacy that we left in 2001, and changing that whole mentality in 2015, 2016. And that was probably maybe a month ago. You can see repositories with the most open source contributors there. Microsoft is sitting at 5th place. We have Facebook as well. So these are companies, multi-billion companies, relying and contributing to open source. In fact, Microsoft is at the top of the most open source contributors in the world right now. It's just insane stuff. So this is a nice chart for SNS Core. How many of you follow SNS Core, our new open source web platform? Okay, so SNS Core is open source from the onset. Roadmap is out there in the open, and the community is also working together to do that. So these are this map depicts the contributors per country in 2014. Okay, so fast forward to 2015. What's that? 2016. Oh man, I skipped that. Look at that. That's massive, right? Look at how many contributors we get outside the company. In fact, SNS Core has about 40% as a whole contributions from the community. So for the whole thing, it's built by 40% contributions from the community. So that's insane. I think 2017 will just be a green overlay over the map. Okay, and we also have the Dotnet Foundation, so the new open source Microsoft, where we actually allow you to host or submit your project to work with the open source community within Microsoft. So although it says Microsoft, it's actually a small subset of Microsoft. What they do, though, is they give you the space and support, and they help you market your project. They help you to give you some space. They give you legal advice. They give you resources from Microsoft for your project. So if you have anything that can benefit the community, especially the .NET community, then you can actually submit it. It doesn't have to be a product that it needs to be used by Microsoft. But if it benefits the community, you can add there. And then you can be side by side with SNS Core and the Core framework and Roslyn and Xamarin and Mono and everything else. So it's a massive project. We do have a lot of open source projects in there, and every day we add new. So reach out to the community if you ever get to that stage. But then again, it's not just Microsoft, right? I'm talking about Microsoft, but we're not the only ones doing open source. In fact, we're too late into the game. We're just trying to catch up, and we're doing it fairly quickly. Other projects, Node.js, it's open source, of course, and we have tons of contributions. AngularJS, all open source as well. Everyone's using it. BootStrap is open source. And too many to list here. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of projects out there that are open source, and we use them every day. So why should you care, right? I mean, why should you be involved? It takes time, it takes effort, but let me tell you why. It's cool. I mean, if you say I'm doing open source, people think, this guy is doing Linux kernel stuff. He knows what he's doing, right? He's a hacker. I mean, you tell people open source. I'm pretty sure that quite a few today will probably never have guessed how you can contribute, and I'll tell you how you can contribute. You don't have to write Linux kernel code. That's it. I thought it was the same thing. I was like, I don't know C++. I can't contribute to Linux. I thought that was open source. It's not. It's really cool. But if you tell people that you're doing open source, that's what they think. So it elevates you. You'll build a great network. Half the people that I met here, I met them in conferences and stuff. I spoke to them before I even met them in person. And that was because I was doing contributions, helping out, raising bugs, and discussing with them about things. So by getting involved with open source, you are becoming part of the community, and then your name will be heard, and then you might eventually become really good friends with some of the really established people in the community. You'll get help and support. I mean, if I have issues here, sometimes, even with Microsoft products, rather than going through the 20 layers of indirection and jumping up through hoops, I go directly to the source because I know these guys, right? And that's insane. And not just with the .NET products or the Microsoft products. It's also with third-party libraries that you might be using, like React stuff, you might be Node stuff. And you get to work with these people. Even contributing a teeny tiny thing, they do appreciate it to the point that eventually if you reach out and say, I have a problem, they might take time off their staff to help you out. So that's fantastic. You join the community. You join the big family of open source. So that will help you as well when you get stuck with something. It's not just, I'm making friends and so on. But you'll also make friends. You'll become a better developer. Now, obviously, you're going to put your code out there in the public domain, and God knows how many people are going to see that, right? So usually, before you even get your pull request accepted, which is one of the ways that we work with open source these days, which means that you take your changes and you merge them to the main branch of the code, you're going to get some feedback back. It might be really good job, well done, congratulations, they're going to be accepted. Or you might get, well, I think you've missed something out, or you could do this better. Or if you get stuck halfway through your task, you can always reach out and say, look, I'm doing this task, but I'm stuck. Can you help me out a little bit? And this is where you get the feedback. This is where you get the support. And this is where you get the mentorship, which comes for free because you're contributing to something and you get something in return. So that's fantastic. You become a better developer. And obviously you get feedback from random people that come into your code and say, this is very good, or this is very crap, and you should do it somehow else. It's great for your CV. I was giving this exact same talk last year, and Rob Connery was sitting in the same audience. I was like, oh my God, it's Rob Connery. So I said, it's going to help you with your CV. In fact, it can be the better attestment of your skill set by saying, I've contributed to 10 projects, and people will see that, and they might know, you might get a job without any tests or interview process or anything else. They might reach out to you and say, look, you've done, I've seen what you've done on GitHub. How about you come and work for us? I'm kidding you not. Now, in the US, it's slightly different. In the US, before you join one of the good companies that, they offer good stuff like Facebook or Amazon or whatever, you need to have your name out in the public domain. And even smaller companies now start to look into that. Because if you are contributing to open source, you have a certain level of competency that people will rely on to use your software, okay? So that's a better attestment of your skill set rather than sitting for half an hour doing random tests. And that's fantastic. And you build your network as well, and you might even get a job without even having to apply because you come into these places and people know you from your open source contributions and say, look, this is an amazing guy, and you're looking for a .NET developer or a JavaScript developer. I know they've done an amazing job, so you should look into that or have a chat. In fact, I was offered a job like that. It's like insane things happen. So it's great. And in the US, it's becoming mandatory. In the UK, it's not that there. But if you do any open source work, I can guarantee you that if you put it on your CV, people will go directly into that, and they will skip the whole thing sometimes, I hope, looking into that. I mean, I would prefer to do that for a developer rather than for them saying, oh, I've worked with Xamarin, and then, okay, how do I know you've done that? Whereas if you have a library for Xamarin that anybody can consume, then obviously that's a very good indication that you've done some work. And finally, free stuff. Free software, guys. I'm kidding you not. If you do open source work and you have a project out there in the public domain, even just one, you can reach out to companies like Telerik and Redgate and submit a form that you say, this is my project, this is my name, and you can find the URL to my open source project, and you'd get free stuff. Xamarin used to do that with their license, so if you were doing anything that was pertinent or related to Xamarin, they would give you almost $2,000 worth of free software before they were bought by Microsoft and everything became free. But it was $2,000 worth of software. And then Redgate would give you the full tool set for you to work with. And then you had ReSharper. They also do an open source license. Now, what's the insane thing is that MVPs also get benefits as Microsoft MVPs, but the Microsoft MVPs get less stuff from the same companies than if you were applying as open source. So I had Redgate toolset, and I said, I'm also an MVP. Totally unrelated. And I said, yeah, you can get these three subsets. I was like, what? As an MVP, I get less than open source, and this is how companies, realize that open source is important. And in fact, if you're using these tools on your spare time, it's almost guaranteed that you'll go to your office and say, look, I'm using this amazing tool. Why not use it in here as well? There's definitely benefit for them as well. But for me, I mean, thinking that in a very selfish way, I got free stuff. That's one way to get started with open source. Who knows? Okay, why do I care? Now, this is why do I care. Because I can build software by standing on the shoulders of giants. Like really clever people out there that I have no way to compare to. They build amazing libraries, amazing tools that I can pull off the web as a package or whatever and work with that. So as a community, we're doing so many good things by building this software and allowing everyone to use it. And obviously, you don't have to rewrite Angular from scratch because it's already out there, right? I mean, imagine having to write all that software for you. In the past, we would do that. It's just amazing, right? And imagine if we didn't have to fix bugs every single day and we were working all together into propelling humanity into something better by using our skill set. Obviously, that's not a reality, but in an ideal world. Okay, so let's say I've convinced you now that you should be doing some open source work. This is my recipe for a successful open source project. Find the project to contribute, write some code, send a pull request, magic happens, you make money, right? Nobody makes money from open source, to be honest, and it's insane because if you think about it, we spend a lot of time, I mean millions of hours every year contributing to open source and creating projects. So why do we do it? Very rare that you'll get money, but you do get all the other benefits I described earlier on, and you're going to become a better developer, that's guaranteed, or I hope. So, how do you get started? Now, let's say I've convinced you you want to be a contributor, and how do we get started? First of all, you need to find a project that actually excites you. Okay, so if you are using a tool day-by-day basis and you think you can make it slightly better, or there's something missing from that project, then you can do that. Just find something that excites you. Although I was writing that, I was thinking maybe you can find a project that you really, really hate because you have to use it, but it's absolutely awful. So how can we make it better? By contributing into it. So you don't have to be excited about the project, you just have to use it and want to use it more. And you can think that you can contribute to that. If you're going to contribute to a project, make sure that they're looking for help, because some of them are open source, they're out there in the community, but they don't accept pull requests because they think they're quite mature. So it might be out there, they might have been out there for 2-3 years, it's heavily used, but they don't accept contributions. So make sure that you get that. Contributing to a project that's still active. Again, if it's a project that was out there for 5 years and there haven't been any updates in maybe 3, then obviously it might still be using .NET 2 or NPM 1.1, and then there's no real point in upgrading it, unless you have to use it, obviously, at which point you might want to fork it and create a copy and reach out, but make sure that it's active, or something that is used actively. And you should only contribute if you're happy with the licensing. Now, we did mention a little bit about licensing, so if you are creating a project as an open source project, make sure that it has a license, because otherwise people can't use it. And then a company that wants to consume open source, they need to have a license attached to it. Otherwise, just because you put it in the public domain does not make it open source. That's very important, okay? So licensing is what makes your software open source. And if there's a license out there, there was GPL licensing, which was quite restrictive. So even though it was open source, it was very restrictive in the way that you used it. And people said, well, I don't want to contribute to anything that has to do with GPL. There was a nice chart a couple of days ago that actually shows how MIT licensing, which is another open source license, has overtaken GPL by a large margin, which is nice now because it means that less people contribute to GPL-based projects. And it's going away because it was quite restrictive in the way they worked. But make sure that you're happy. I know people that would not contribute to GPL-based projects. Just a reference. So look into that. And where do you get started? I mean, where do you find all these projects? I mean, people say, I'm contributing all the time, but where do you find the projects? So there are some really good sites out there that allow you to reach out. If you are first time ever, there are two ones, the first timers only, and your first PR, which is a nice Twitter handle. I'll share the deck as well later on, so you don't really have to copy it. But the idea is that if you've never done open source before, these sites have really, really simple tasks for you to do. Some of them might be documentation. Some of them may be something else, like sorting out or fixing very, very small bugs. And I'll tell you what, every single documentation out there has typos, so if you find that, you can contribute. In fact, I got my name as an ASP.NET contributor by fixing documentation, because I was reading something at 11 p.m. at night, and it wouldn't make any sense. It was like a sentence. I thought somebody has written it, but did not really know English well to write English in a way that would make sense. So I was reading it like 4 times, and it wouldn't make any sense. So I reached out to the maintainers. I said, look, can I change this sentence to this sentence? Do you think it's right? And I said, yeah, go for it. So I did that, and then the next day, my name appeared. And if you go into GitHub, you'll see the contributions you've done. ASP.NET Core was at the top. I was like, oh my God, people don't know what you've done. It was just a simple sentence, right? But you can say, well, I'm contributing to ASP.NET Core. It can be the same for NPM or whatever you use. So it's the simple things that, they add value. Even though if it's just one sentence, people read that and say, well, it seems better now, so why not? But for other things, up4grabs.net, mainly for .NET code, but you can find other projects there. So they have issues in GitHub or whatever other repositories that they mark with a specific label that allows them to publish that project into up4grabs. And this is where you go and say, I want a task in .NET, and they say whether it's advanced, intermediary, or beginner, and you can pick up tasks from there. Same for Issue Hub and OpenHats. They do have the exact same functionality. But if you're a bit more advanced, you can use Code Triage, which sends you an inbox from projects that you've registered, and it will send you an issue every day on your inbox. So you can have a look into that and say, well, I want to take it or not. And pull request roulette. That's, if you feel adventurous about it, this is where you get a pull request that waits for a reviewer to go in and say, I like your code, or you've made a mistake here, or you could do it better. So these are the sites that most people would go in and look into that. Alternatively, you can go to GitHub, if you know already a project that you're working on, and you've used it quite a bit, and grab it from there and become a contributor as well. Now, this is my contributors checklist, and this is the important stuff. First of all, you need to learn how to Git, or use Git, if that makes sense. This is crucial because whether we like it or not, the open source language speaks Git. So the basic commands, git pull, git fetch, there's ample documentation out there. If you go to the official Git site, they have a very good documentation about the things that they do. And every single person out there has also written a blog post about how to do something. So the 9 basic commands are there. Just learn them and use them. You don't need anything else. Find a tool that works for you, command line, GUI, whatever works for you, and use it. But that's the starting point. You need to learn how to do the basic commands in Git. Now, if you find the project that you want to contribute to, make sure that you read the contribution instructions. And that's very important. So they will say, if you want to contribute, go and fork the project. They will give you a set of instructions. This is how you run it locally, and this is how you do things. They also have instructions about how to write the code and whether you should reach out to them first, and that's the next one. Contact the owner. So if you say, I found a bug, don't start fixing it without communicating with anyone, because they might already be looking into that bug and fixing it on the side. So the first thing that you need to do is maybe raise an issue or reach out to them by email or Twitter and say, look, I'm using your software. I love it. I found a bug, or I think we can add a feature here, and you can start the ball rolling, right? And they might say, yes, please go and do it. Or they might say, don't worry about it. It's already in the backlog. We've already done some work, so please don't spend any time on that. But if you want to contribute, you can do something else. So reach out to the owner, because honestly, you might spend maybe 2 weeks worth of time, and then they might not accept your pull request because it doesn't fit their backlog or whatever. Don't change coding standards. I was going to put a tabs versus spaces there because that's one of the things that get people rambling. Another thing is, obviously, if you're using tools like FXCop or documenting your methods in a certain way, I don't like comments. Some people really like comments. But if I have to contribute to their project that's all commented out, then I would need to abide to that rule. So if you are contributing, just stick with that code structure or that code pattern. That also allows you to learn about new ways to write code, right? Some people might like LINQ, a very verbose LINQ. Some people might like using Lambda expressions. So try to adjust to their needs, because that will also make you a better developer. That's where we're coming back into working with different styles of code. Do not change in coding standards. Attach related unit tests. So if you are fixing, if you're fixing a bug or attaching a new feature into the solution, there's no better way to get your pull request accepted by saying, these are the unit tests, guys, right? So I've worked really, really hard, and I can prove that this is working. I can also prove that this is not going to change or break your code in a way that you don't expect. So if you are sending a pull request, make sure that it has the attach related unit tests. If you find bugs before you even start working, maybe you can send a screenshot or steps to recreate. I think I read somewhere that it's becoming the norm now to send small videos or GIFs where somebody just goes through the steps and does it, which doesn't really make any sense. I mean, imagine as a developer, somebody says, your application is not working. this is a video that I'm showing that it's not working. It's even better if you actually put it in text and say, these are the steps I followed, and this is the exception I got. Because that actually proves that it's working, and it's also replicatable. And be patient. If you send a pull request in, it doesn't mean that it's going to be accepted overnight. I have pull requests out there that have been sitting for a while, and nobody has really looked into them. I tend to reach out and say, look, I've got a pull request here. Do you want to have a look? Maybe you're busy, or I understand. Some of them have like 120 pull requests. I tend to contribute quite a lot to the Azure documentation right now, and they have their own backlog. So if I find something that is not documented, I will go and write a little bit of a blog post or whatever, and then contribute back to the docs. But they have a massive backlog, so they might say, well, we'll not attach it for another 2 weeks. So be patient, and don't expect your pull request to be automatically accepted. It might take a couple of weeks. OK, so now we're moving from being a contributor to being a maintainer. Right? So that's fantastic. Actually, before we go into that and say that you're all rock stars if you're already doing it, a couple more things. Now, we did say that you don't have to write Linux kernel code, which is what people think that you're doing. But what can you do if you haven't done any open source and you're not really confident enough? Maybe you're straight out of uni, you don't really have a lot of experience. So some of the things they can do, obviously, and I've mentioned before, documentation, very important, because you can go and contribute the documentation. And usually, documentation is pretty crap with open source, because most people are bored. They want to write the code and no documents. And that really helps you, because writing documentation means they have to go through the code. And it means they have to understand how the code works to write the docs. So that's one way you're getting up to speed. And it's easier as well, because it doesn't require a lot of pressure. Other things you can do is you can actually replicate issues. So if somebody raises an issue about the software, you can grab it, fork it in your own environment, and run it. Because sometimes they might raise that issue because they were running, let's say, NPM on Mac OS with a specific version of Mac, and it wasn't working. But you download on Windows and try to run the same thing, and it's working. So that's one way to eliminate certain things. So the developer will not really have to worry about Windows because it knows that it's working, and you've just proved it by saying, well, it works on my machine, and I have Windows and that version, but it still reduces the scope of the bug. So that's helpful. Plus, you get up to speed on how you run software on your own machine. Sometimes you can contribute by creating the public image of the project. So maybe it's a big project, but I don't have a public domain that people can go and see stuff, and it's only GitHub. So maybe you can create a website for them that they might want to use. Or maybe on a website, you can go and do some tutorials on how to do things with the software. Or you can even do some graphic work. That's actually quite helpful. I have a friend that is not really good at developing, but he's an awesome designer. And he started contributing to open source by creating logos. Because, naming and finding a name for your project and maybe attaching a nice logo to that adds value. But, we all struggle with naming. So let's say the naming is resolved, but we want to create a nice logo that people can relate to. And I'm a crappy designer. I would never do anything with design. So this guy is amazing, and he can contribute to that. So he's doing his bit about open source, and he doesn't really have to write a single piece of code. So that's another way to contributing things. And you can put your name in there. So let's say now that you're a maintainer, and you rock because you spend your time and you're free, your spare time in doing these things. You don't get paid for it, which is very insane. We do it and we don't get paid. And we want to thank you because we use your software on every single day. But I'm pretty sure there's a little bit of scope there for becoming a better maintainer. So first thing first, if you are going to put a project out there in the public domain, make sure that you're not doing it for the sake of it. You don't say, well, I open source something. There's a lot of software out there that is just pet projects that were done over a weekend and they're dumped out there in the public domain, which is fine. I mean, it can be a public repository, but do not really advertise that open source because obviously you have to maintain it. So open source is not just for Christmas, as I like to say, it's for a lifetime. People will use your software. I've got sample code from blog posts I wrote, and people go and grab it from GitHub and they say it doesn't run. This is from 2 years ago, man. It's not for consumption. So be careful how you advertise your project. When I do it and when I put stuff in GitHub that relate to my blog post, for example, I don't put a license there because people should not really be using it. And I also put instructions out there saying, this is just for my, for this blog post and link back. If you want to use it, then please be aware that it's not open source and something like that. So people know that it's not maintained and it's not up to date and should not be looking into using it. Create contribution guidelines. Now, this is from the reverse side of things, where people will come into your software and they have no idea how to run it. Do I need Python on my machine to run stuff? Why didn't I put it in there? Do I need NPM? Do I need something else? What tools do I need to use? Do I need to use Vim, VI? Does it only run in Visual Studio? Do I need to have a specific editor? So it's all these things that you give us guidelines. Like if you're going for the first time and try to contribute, you want to know and read these things, how to set up your environment. So the exact same thing in there. If you don't have time to write code, the documents, please add unit tests, because sometimes even a sample project can be more of value to someone rather than reading the documents, because it will go into your code and see how it works. Maybe if you create a library and have a sample code that actually calls into the library to do some stuff, that can be more of value rather than having documents and spending hours and hours. Maybe one of the new contributors will come and write your documents for you. Add setup instructions that goes back into the contribution guidelines. Also things like, this is what you need to download, and please do not change my coding standards. Don't go from tabs to spaces and back and forth, whatever you prefer. But the idea is that you need to set up expectations, otherwise people will spend time and then you'll say, well, I can't accept your pull request because you did not read my instructions. So it's a nice reference point for you. Be open to criticism. Yeah, you put your code out in the public domain, and sometimes there'll be comments coming back saying your code is crap, or your code is very slow, or it doesn't run. People tend not to be bad in, when they discuss or consume open source, but some of them can be. So if you're going to put your code out there, be a bit of a thick skin and say, right, okay, well, I accept your comment. Maybe you can show me how to do it better. And this is how, again, you become a better developer. Include a code of contact. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, we're seeing this more and more, where people need to include code of contacts in their open source projects, only because some people tend to misbehave or being really mean to each other. It doesn't happen often. I mean, I've been working with open source for 3 years. I'm a noob still, but in every single project I've been, I haven't really seen any bad incidents. There was one. A guy raised an issue from a year ago, and then he went back to the repo to say, this is still open and nobody's looking into that. And he started that whole conversation of, look, it's open source. If you want to fix it, you're more than welcome to send a pull request. And he was like, no, that's not how it works. Well, and the guy said, well, if you want to pay me, I'll fix it tomorrow. So that's how it works. This is open source. We contribute for free. There's no expectations. There's that false entitlement for people. When they consume open source, they have that false entitlement that they're allowed to say or do whatever they want. So code of contact protects you from things like that, and you can say, well, you're banned from my repo, so thank you very much, but we're not going to be listening to you anymore. Adding explicit open source licenses. Again, this goes back into, if you have something very useful that people want to consume, I know big companies out there that they can't consume really useful projects because they don't have a license attached to them. So that's stopping them from using your software and getting loads and loads of usage and downloads and benefiting everybody else. So make sure you add a license. In fact, these days, if you go to GitHub, I might have a quick demo if we have enough time. How much more time do we have? Do you know what time do we finish? Okay. So we might have some time to do a couple of demos. But the idea is that when you create a new project now, in GitHub, it says, would you like to attach a license? Which is fantastic because it takes all that, having to go into the MIT license site and grab the site for you. So it says, which license would you like to attach? Which is brilliant. And be supportive of new members. So maybe you've been doing it for 10 years. Maybe you're ace. Maybe you're a hacker. Maybe you're the best developer out there. But everybody has to start somewhere. And people will make mistakes. So if somebody does want to contribute and they don't get it right, be supportive. If somebody reaches out to you for help, please be supportive, because I would never be here if it wasn't for Jeff 3 years ago when he said to me, raise a pull request and we'll accept it. And he was, very helpful. He even sent comments back saying, this doesn't look good, fix it. And then I fixed it and said, right, that's fantastic, we'll take it. Thank you very much for contributing. So that's the whole point. I mean, it wasn't really much. I didn't do much for them, but the contribution was very important to them. And he said, thanks. I mean, that's the best thing you can get. And when things go bad. Now, if you are a maintainer of a project, things do change in life, and that's life circumstances. You get kids that take up all of your time. You don't have enough time to do open source with young kids. Maybe you have to move. Maybe you're out of job. Maybe you're in a transition period. Maybe something happens, right? Just let people know. There's a nice way to just put a nice banner in your project saying, this is not maintained, I'm looking for maintainers, and this happens quite often. People will say, I don't have enough time to do this. Does anyone in the community want to take over? And people do tend to jump into the opportunity to say, well, I would like to do that. And these days, most projects do have 1 or 2 maintainers that they co-own the project, so it's easy to pass the torch. If you don't, go out, put the banner out there, say, look, I can't look into that right now. I might be back in 2 years. If anybody wants to use the project, please be aware it's not maintained. Feel free to take over ownership. You might be tired or bored. It happens. You might have too much to do at work and you don't want to contribute anymore. Or the Large Hadron Collider implodes, explodes, and humanity is wiped. That's fine. How bad can things go? This is a comment that somebody put out there for a project. So this guy, Keystone.js, maintains this project. And this guy went back and said, your documents, which is also mistyped, are filled with lies. You heard the community and you should stop. I mean, it's open source, right? If he doesn't like it, he doesn't have to use it. He hasn't paid any money for that. That's the false entitlement I was talking about. And this is just one of the hundreds of thousands. People have gone off open source only because they had this kind of, dealers dealing with the community. So let's try to be good at each other, right, rather than doing these things. So there are more useful things out there, and there's a nice book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar, if you ever want to go and read onto that rather than writing code. I would prefer to write code rather than doing this. And I think we have some time for some demos. So how many of you use GitHub here? You all know it? Awesome. How many of you have done a pull request? On GitHub? Nice. So you've done some open source work. Some of you said you haven't. Okay. So if you were to do that, and I do have a few projects that I contribute, so it's just going to jump into that. I hate. So if I go into my repo. So one of the things you can always do is go into a repository and find the issues. You can always find them here at the top. And say, I want to look into stuff. And it will open at some point when my phone decides to. There you go. So one of the things you can put here is create a new issue or a new bug and do that. You can also fork the project. So this is what we do when we copy the project over to our own environment. So if I were to click on that, it says, where do you want to copy this? And I already have a copy of this, so there's no point. I can just do that. So it will go and copy that for me. So you can see now, rather than being at Brady's website, we're on my website, or my account, my repository, and this is my copy, which is forked by Brady. So if I start doing any changes here, Brady will not be able to see them. So that's as simple as that. And then if something changes in my environment, then I can do a new pull request. So this is the whole point. I can click into that. Brady will love me for doing this. But there's nothing really to change or compare. So if I had to do it, if I had done a change, then you could see it. But do you get the basic idea of how things work? And it doesn't have to be loads. I mean, I have probably about 50 projects in my site which are forked from random places. Some of them I contributed to, some of them I haven't contributed to. But it's all about looking and learning about the code. So let me go back into my slides. So I'll leave some time for questions if you have any questions about open source and whether you came across any stories or anything that you'd like to share with us. And I'll be more than happy to answer things. But that's the idea. I mean, you can ask anything about open source. Do you find any value today when we discussed about open source and how to get started? I know some of you have not contributed before, so yeah? You're going to go out and do some open source today? Awesome. Well, I think that's me. We have probably 10 minutes left. Yeah? Grab some coffee, unless you have questions. And feel free to reach out to me.
How much time do you spend on open source projects?
How much time do I spend?
You touched on the fact you've got kids and commitments.
I do. Yeah, I'm up, but the kids go to bed, and then the wife goes to bed, and I stay up at crazy hours in the morning. But that's me. You don't have to do it. I know some people that, depending on how you work, I mean, I work full-time, so it's not easy for me to say I'm not going to go to customers because I want to do open source. But if you are a consultant, a lot of freelancers tend to do open source, where they will, they manage the time in a totally different way that we manage as full-time. So they might say, I want to take 2 days a week to do some open source work and contributions. But these are guys that do hardcore contributions, and they write the whole framework. For me, it's on my spare time, and sometimes if I find something... Now, I'm very reactive. I'm not really managing things. Like I don't have a project that I maintain all the time. And my projects that I have out there tend to be quite mature, so they don't change that often. The ones that are built on the Azure SDK, they might change, so I change them every time the Azure SDK comes out, run the test. If that works, then happy. So I do that. Everything else I do, and these days I do a lot of documentation, I'm kidding you not. I'm probably, if you check my GitHub environment, you'll see that I've got a contribution every single day because I work with the Azure documentation all the time, and I'm a customer, so I'm trying to explain to them how to do things. If I find something that doesn't stand right, or if there's a bug in the code, then I will fix it. So I might take an hour or two throughout my day just to fix something. But if I were to do, like we have the project with Brady right now, which is a tool set for Azure inside Visual Studio Code. So it allows you to manage all your infrastructure by using Visual Studio Code. And that's totally cross-platform, open source. You don't have to have any dependencies. So that tool, we are quite invested into that. So it might take 3 or 4 hours a day. But then again, there might be 2 or 3 months I don't do any open source. It's totally down to you how you do it because you manage your time. Sometimes if you're...
Some of your time is spent sort of a part of your job.
Yes. Yes and no. I mean, you're consuming something that might be open source. Maybe, I don't know, AutoMapper in .NET. And if you find a bug, you're going to go raise an issue. That's your first contribution. I mean, it doesn't have to be code. Or you might find something that's missing the docs and raise that with Jimmy, who maintains the product. The idea is that any simple thing you do, it's a contribution to open source. It doesn't have to be code or core code or tests. Okay? And you can manage your time. I mean, for me, it's when everybody's in bed, because that's the only time I have free. Or when I'm traveling, it's more flexible because I don't have anyone around me when I go back to the hotel. But again, that's personally me. I know other people take time off work to do that. You can't do it full time because obviously unless you get a sponsor for it that will pay the money for you, then it's very hard to make a living out of that because it's open source, they don't pay for it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that, I imagine that a lot of us are in positions where we are using open source software.
Yeah.
And sometimes modify for our own use in the company. And certainly, we barely have the time to, or even the...
Inclination?
Even the legal side maybe gets into a problem of contributing that back.
And that's...
There isn't a culture necessarily in some companies of doing actually what is relatively small changes to it.
That's a very important thing, and we are seeing a shift in the culture. Some people will not join companies unless they're allowed to do open source, not through the company time, but on their own. Because there are companies out there that in the contract, they say that any code you develop while you're employed by us, even on your spare time, belongs to us, which is insane because not many people do open source, but eventually if you develop a very successful tool that people tend to use, the company might go and say, we want to monetize on that, and that belongs to us. So that's a very, very important clause in your contract. You might want to have a look into that before you even get started. Maybe something I should have included in the slides. But yes, lots of companies do fix things. I mean, I had a company that I did a talk on SNS Core, and they said, we fixed something with, in fact, the framework, the logging framework that was causing issues, but we are in a battle with our legal team because we want to contribute that externally and send it back, or send a pull request, but we're not allowed to. But even in the UK, I'm starting to see a massive shift in the way that developers themselves. So I think we need to push back a little bit and say to companies, look, it's fine consuming all this open source, but the fact that we don't really pay the money, at least we can contribute back to them and help them fix their bugs. I mean, you're fixing bugs for yourself, right? And it makes sense. Do you not want some other person in the world to be able to benefit from your effort? Obviously, yes. And it doesn't take you extra effort to do it. It's just a change in culture. And we're seeing a lot of companies now. I mean, you see Microsoft, you see Apple. These are giants and dinosaurs in the way that they move. And you can see how quickly they move into embracing open source because it's the future. For me, it's the future. And every company out there should actually contribute one way or another. I think somebody had a question back there.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had any success convincing your more traditional customers or sort of more traditional employers to do some of the work you were doing for them as open source.
While I was working for them?
Yeah, as part of your regular job.
Yeah, I think we sent a pull request back to SignalR. I was stuck in a company that had to do, obviously, it shouldn't have been the case, but I was on XP using .NET 4, and that would only allow us to go to SignalR 1.8 something, which was the latest version before 2.0, which 2.0 was targeting 4.5. And we had a problem. We were having issues, so we sent a pull request, and the team said, well, fine, you can do that. So yes, I've managed it. And they were a bank. I mean, but I was quite flexible, and my manager was quite understanding, and he was all agile and new spirit, the new idea. But traditionally, it's very, very hard to, yes, it's very hard to convince companies. But I go to a lot of customers these days. They are embracing open source more and more. And when you speak to them and say half of your toolset is actually open source, it's a shame that you don't contribute back or fix bugs, then you can start seeing that shift. It's slow again. It might take years before it happens, but it's exciting to see that people, and I think developers are the ones that need to push back again. I did mention that you need to push back and say, look, I'm using this tool. We found a bug. We should change it. But legal things don't change that. Legal documentation or legal rules in a company, very hard to convince upper management to change that. Just make sure that if you are contributing, you don't have any clauses in your contract. I think that would be probably the biggest bummer. Realizing that any time that you spend belongs to your company. Renegotiate your contracts. No, I didn't say that public.
Usually it's like it says everything you develop belongs to us.
Yep.
Unless you have the document proving it's not. So you go to your code manager and he gives you this exception.
Yes.
Okay, but that stuff is yours.
Yeah. I mean, internally, even my team, I work for Microsoft, so we do have certain rules about how much code you can put in the public domain before it has to go through reviews in the legal department and so on. But it tends to be quite lax. I mean, something like 1,500 lines of code or more needs to be reviewed by the legal team. But you start seeing even internally now that people say, well, if you are going to benefit the community, you might as well just put it out there. And then if there are any issues, we can speak to the legal department. I mean, .NET Core is out there, and they're doing so many things, like millions of lines of code. You can see that there is a shift change. My manager is very supportive. We, as PFEs, we do a lot of work with customers, proof of concepts, no real production code, but even proof of concepts, I found that putting stuff out there in the public domain and saying, if you were to do something, consuming one of those services, then this is a sample code that you can do it. People benefit from that, and even between us, we can share code in a much better way rather than sending emails and saying, this is the piece of code that I wrote. More visibility. Yeah.
There's also one comment that may be important to mention. If you start developing, even on a spare time, and you don't have disclosure in a contract, if you're still using software which is licensed by your company, you should not do it.
Correct.
Yeah.
So things like Visual Studio or any editors you might be using that are not open source and the company paid for them, then you can land yourself in some really hot water. Depending, I think I've met a guy here in last year that he wrote an amazing piece of software, and he was working for Shell, and he ended up going into a legal battle with them because they said this software belongs to us because you were doing it in your spare time with our own tools. So just be careful if you want to do open source, and make sure you check your clauses. But hopefully that's the only thing that's stopping you from contributing. Just your contract clauses, not your will to contribute. I think that's me, guys. Thank you very much for coming. And catch me later if you want, yeah? Thanks.